The first time the Bible speaks of Jesus, he did not yet have a name. He did not have a face. He did not have a family. Adam and Eve had just eaten the fruit. God was coming down into the garden to pronounce judgment. And in the middle of that judgment, he released a sentence that would echo for 2,000 years. Every Old Testament prophecy about Jesus in the order in which it was revealed. From the first verse in Genesis to the last prophet of the Hebrew canon. We are going to see how God narrowed this revelation over the centuries. First, only a vague promise about a seed, then a family, then a tribe, then a city, then a way of arriving, then a way of dying, then an exact date. Each prophet adds a layer. Let's begin. 1. Genesis 3, verse 15. The first messianic prophecy in the entire Bible. The scene is the Garden of Eden, right after the fall. Adam and Eve have just eaten the fruit. God comes down, asks the question, listens to the excuse, and begins to speak. But there is a strange detail. He does not speak first to the man or to the woman. He speaks first to the serpent, and what he says is almost enigmatic. I will put enmity between you and the woman, and between your seed and her seed. He shall bruise your head, and you shall bruise his heel. The early Christians looked at this verse and saw Jesus there. They called it the proto-evangelium, the first gospel, the first announcement of the good news, hidden inside a sentence of judgment. But why see Jesus here? The key word is seed, in Hebrew zerah, and here there is a detail that no translation in the world can carry well. The phrase is, the seed of the woman, in Hebrew, zara. And right after that comes the pronoun that refers to this seed. What would be expected is a neutral or plural pronoun because seed is collective, but the text uses who, a masculine, singular pronoun. He shall bruise your head. Notice this, it is not they shall bruise. It is he, an individual, a specific person. In the middle of a sentence about collectivity, the Hebrew points to one man. And even stranger, the entire Bible normally speaks of the seed of the male. Genealogies pass through the father. Here, out of nowhere, the seed belongs to the woman, as if from the very first prophetic verse about the Messiah, the text was already preparing someone to understand that this conception would be different. This is the starting point. Everything that comes afterward is a narrowing. Who is this seed? When does he come? How will he crush the serpent? The next prophets answer these questions one by one over almost 2,000 years. 2. Genesis 12 verse 3, the promise to Abraham. Skip about 10 chapters. Leave the garden, cross the flood, cross Babel, and arrive at a man named Abram in Ur of the Chaldeans. God appears and gives a promise on 3 levels. I will give you a land. I will make you a great nation. And the 3rd level, which is what matters for this story. In you all the families of the earth shall be blessed. In Abraham, all of them. Not only his family, not only the nation that would come from him, all the families of the earth. This is already a warning. The seed promised in the garden now has a genetic address. It will come from that man, from that specific lineage. But the effect of the blessing will overflow beyond it. It will reach everywhere. First-century Jews read this phrase and understood that something would happen within their people that would have consequences for all humanity. Paul would take this verse in Galatians 3 verse 16 centuries later and make a sharp etymological argument. He writes this, "Now the promises were made to Abraham and to his seed." It does not say, "and to seeds," as though speaking of many, but as of one. "And to your seed, who is Christ." Paul reads the singular in Hebrew the same way the early Christians read the he in Genesis 3, an individual, not a collective. 3. Genesis 22, Mount Moriah. Here the prophecy stops being only a word and becomes a drama. God asks Abraham to sacrifice Isaac, the promised son. The scene is absurd. The man who received the promise climbs the mountain to kill the son who carries the promise. Isaac carries the wood, Abraham carries the fire and the knife. On the way, the boy asks, "Where is the lamb?" And Abraham answers with a phrase that sounds evasive but is prophecy. God will provide for himself the lamb for the burnt offering. They climb the mountain. Abraham binds Isaac on the altar. He raises the knife, and the angel cries out for him to stop. Nearby in the thicket, there is a ram caught by its horns. Abraham sacrifices the ram in place of the son. All of that is already powerful on its own. But there is a geographical detail that completely changes the reading. The mountain is called Moriah. And in 2 Chronicles 3, verse 1, the text identifies Mount Moriah as the mountain where Solomon built the temple in Jerusalem. 1,000 years after the Akedah, the temple is built there, and on the same geographical ridge, another 1,000 years later, Jesus carries a cross up the same slope. A son carries the wood along the way. The father is willing to give him up. A substitute dies in his place. The entire story of Genesis 22 is a shadow of what would happen in the same geographical place 2,000 years later. The early Christians saw this parallel immediately. It is one of the oldest in the interpretive tradition of the church. 4. Genesis 49, verse 10. Jacob's blessing over Judah. Jacob is dying. He gathers his 12 sons and gives a prophetic blessing to each one. When he comes to Judah, he says an enigmatic phrase, "The scepter shall not depart from Judah, nor the ruler's staff from between his feet until Shiloh comes, and to him shall the peoples be gathered." Here the tribe appears. The seed of the garden, which became a family with Abraham, now becomes a tribe. The king will come from Judah, but the interesting point is the word Shiloh. In Hebrew, Shiloh. The ancients debated this for centuries. There are 3 main readings. The first, more literal one, is that Shiloh was a geographical place. The second reads Shiloh, which means tribute to him. The third reads Shiloh, the one to whom it belongs. The kingdom, the scepter, the dominion belong to someone who is still to come. And the detail is that Jews before Christ already read this messianically. The Targum Onkelos, an Aramaic translation of the Pentateuch used in synagogues in the 1st and 2nd centuries, translates the phrase like this: "Until the Messiah comes, to whom the kingdom belongs." This is not a Christian interpretation forcing the ancient text. It is a Jewish reading that came before Christianity. 5. Numbers 24, verse 17. Balaam's star. Move forward through the wilderness. Israel is leaving Egypt on the way to the promised land. The king of Moab hires a Gentile diviner named Balaam to curse the people. But every time Balaam opens his mouth, blessing comes out instead of curse. And on the 4th attempt, he prophesies something no one asked for. "I see him, but not now. I behold him, but not near. A star shall come out of Jacob, and a scepter shall rise out of Israel." Star and scepter, royalty and light, and the detail is who says it. A Gentile prophet, a pagan, a man who was being paid to curse Israel ends up prophesying Israel's Messiah. This is already a clue that this figure would matter beyond the chosen people. The Magi from the east, more than 1,000 years later, appear in Matthew chapter 2 following a star. Ancient Christian tradition connected this directly to Balaam's prophecy. The Jewish diaspora had taken the scriptures to Persia during the Babylonian exile. The Magi were readers of these texts. When they saw a star appear, they knew what to look for and where to look. 6. Deuteronomy 18, verse 15. The prophet like Moses. Moses is at the end of his life. He is giving his final speech to the people before they enter the promised land. And in the middle of the instructions, he announces, "The Lord your God will raise up for you a prophet from among you, from your brothers like me. You shall listen to him like me." That phrase is strong. Moses was the greatest figure of the Old Testament in the Jewish view. He brought the people out of Egypt. He received the Torah at Sinai. He spoke with God face to face. And he is saying that another one like him is coming. The Jews waited for this prophet for centuries. When John the Baptist begins to preach in John chapter 1, verse 21, they ask him, "Are you the prophet?" It was not just any prophet, it was the prophet, the one from Moses' promise. They knew exactly what they were talking about. Peter, after the resurrection, would preach in Acts 3, verse 22, quoting this exact prophecy and identifying Jesus as that prophet. Stephen makes the same connection in Acts 7. The early church understood that the phrase "like me" had a specific recipient. 7. 2 Samuel 7 verses 12 to 16. The covenant with David. Jump about 300 years. Israel is already in the land, has already passed through the judges, and has already had its first king. David is on the throne in Jerusalem. He wants to build a house for God, a permanent temple. And God responds with a promise that becomes a covenant. When your days are complete and you rest with your fathers, then I will raise up your seed after you, who will come from your body, and I will establish his kingdom. I will be to him a father, and he shall be to me a son. Your house and your kingdom shall be established forever before you, and your throne shall be established forever. Here the house appears. The seed of the garden, which became a family with Abraham, which became a tribe with Jacob, now becomes a dynasty. The Messiah will be the son of David. He will sit on David's throne, and the throne does not end. That last detail is what no one could explain. David died, Solomon died, the kings of Judah died one by one. The kingdom divided, fell, the temple was destroyed, and the people went to Babylon. How would the throne be established forever if the entire dynasty had already been cut off? Peter would take this text in Acts 2, verse 30, and say that David knew God had sworn to him with an oath that from the fruit of his loins he would set someone on his throne. For Peter, the Davidic covenant only makes sense with the resurrection. A descendant of David needs to be alive in order to reign forever. Otherwise, the promise died together with the dynasty. 8. Psalm 2. You are my son. Today I have begotten you. David is composing. The Messianic Psalms begin here. And Psalm 2 is the starting point. The scene of the psalm is a rebellion of the kings of the earth against God and against his anointed one. The word anointed in Hebrew is Mashiach. That is where our word Messiah comes from. And the Greek version of the same word is Christos. That is where Christ comes from. Both titles mean exactly the same thing. The one who was anointed with oil, consecrated for a function. And in the middle of the scene, God speaks to this anointed one and says, "You are my son. Today I have begotten you." A phrase that would resonate centuries later at the baptism of Jesus in Matthew 3, verse 17, when the voice from heaven says, "This is my beloved Son, in whom I am well pleased." The two texts speak to each other. Whoever hears the voice at the baptism while knowing Psalm 2 immediately understands what is happening. The anointed one of Psalm 2 has just been publicly recognized by the Father. And Psalm 2 still ends with a phrase many people miss. Kiss the Son, lest he be angry and you perish. Honor the Son, recognize the Son. David, almost 1,000 years before Jesus, speaks of a Son of God who must be recognized by the kings of the nations. 9. Psalm 16, verse 10. You will not leave my soul in Sheol, David again. Another psalm. But now he writes a phrase that, when read carefully, cannot apply to himself. The phrase is, "You will not leave my soul in Sheol, nor will you allow your Holy One to see corruption." Sheol is the Hebrew name for the dwelling place of the dead, and corruption in this context is the decomposition of the body in the tomb. But David died. David is in the tomb. David's tomb was still visited in Jerusalem in the 1st century. His body saw corruption like any other human body. So the Holy One, the psalm speaks about cannot be the author himself. Peter uses this exact argument in Acts 2, verses 25 to 32. At Pentecost, 10 days after the ascension, Peter is preaching in Jerusalem to a crowd of Jews, and he takes Psalm 16 to explain the resurrection of Jesus. The argument is simple, and it works. David wrote about someone whose body would not see corruption. It was not David. It was someone from David's descendants, and that someone God raised from the dead. The Messianic reading of Psalm 16 did not begin with Peter. He is only making explicit what the text always carried, and here the first phase of Messianic revelation ends. From Genesis to David, from the garden to the throne, each prophet added a layer: the seed, the family, the tribe, the house, the way of reigning. And now, with David, the idea begins to appear more clearly. The anointed one will die and will not remain dead. The dynasty will be preserved by someone who passes through the tomb. The next phase begins with the writing prophets. Isaiah, Micah, Jeremiah, Ezekiel, Daniel, Zechariah, and Malachi will take this silhouette and draw the face. The virgin who gives birth, the exact city where he is born, the appointed date, the way he dies, the money that will be paid, the place from which they will look at him after he is dead. That is what comes in the second part, 10, Isaiah 7 verse 14, the sign of the virgin. 700 years before Christ, the kingdom of Judah is in trouble. Two neighboring kingdoms have joined forces to invade Jerusalem. King Ahaz, from the line of David, is terrified. Isaiah appears with a message. He tells Ahaz to ask God for a sign. Ahaz pretends to be pious and refuses. Isaiah responds almost with irritation. Therefore the Lord himself will give you a sign. Behold, a virgin shall conceive and bear a son, and shall call his name Emmanuel. There is a Hebrew word here that has caused debate for centuries. Alma. In Hebrew, Alma is a young woman of marriageable age, a virgin in the culture of that time. Some say it should have been Betula, which is more explicit, but the Greek version of the Old Testament, the Septuagint, translated by Jews in Alexandria 200 years before Christ, chose the word Parthenos. And Parthenos means virgin in the technical sense, without ambiguity. Notice this: Jews, centuries before the birth of Jesus, translated Alma as Parthenos. It was not later Christians forcing the text, it was their natural reading. Matthew, in chapter 1, verse 23, quotes this exact phrase in Greek when he explains the virgin birth, and the name Emmanuel is the detail that seals it. In Hebrew, Emmanuel. Emmanuel means with us. El means God. God with us. The name announces that this child is not only a prophet and not only a king. He is the divine presence walking among the people. 11. Isaiah 9 verses 6 and 7. The names of the child. Same prophet 2 chapters later. Isaiah returns to the theme, and now he lists the names this child will carry. For unto us a child is born, unto us a son is given, and the government shall be upon his shoulders, and his name shall be called Wonderful Counselor, Mighty God, Everlasting Father, Prince of Peace. Look at that list, Wonderful Counselor. Fine, a possible human title. Prince of Peace, that also works. But Mighty God, in Hebrew El Gibor, the same El that appears in Emmanuel, the same El that appears in the most ancient names for God in the Bible. And Everlasting Father, Avi Ad, Father of endless time. These are not titles any human king carries in the Hebrew tradition. How can a child born in history be reconciled with a name that belongs only to the Eternal One? First-century Jews were aware of this paradox. The text simply stayed there, waiting for someone who fit the description. 12. Isaiah 53, the servant who suffers. Now we arrive at the most debated chapter in the Old Testament. Isaiah 53 is so clear about Jesus that for a long time, synagogues avoided reading it publicly. You can almost replace servant with Jesus line by line, and it becomes direct. He was despised and rejected by men. Surely he has borne our griefs. But he was pierced for our transgressions and crushed for our iniquities. Like a lamb, he was led to the slaughter, and like a sheep silent before its shearers, so he did not open his mouth. They assigned his grave with the wicked, but with the rich in his death. That last verse is absurdly precise. 7 centuries earlier, Isaiah says the servant would be buried among the rich after being executed as a criminal. How does that work? Buried with the wicked, but in the tomb of a rich man. In Matthew 27, verse 57, Joseph of Arimathea, a rich man, asks for the body of Jesus and places it in his own new tomb. His grave was assigned with the wicked because he was crucified between 2 thieves, but he was with the rich in his death because he was buried in the tomb of a rich man. And the chapter continues. When he makes his soul an offering for sin, he shall see his offspring, he shall prolong his days. The servant dies, and then he prolongs his days. He dies, and then he lives. Isaiah is pointing to the same thing David had whispered in Psalm 16. This anointed one passes through death. 13. Micah 5, verse 2. The city, a contemporary of Isaiah, same 8th century before Christ. Micah is prophesying to the southern kingdom, and in a single verse, he fixes a geographical detail that no one could invent centuries later. But you, Bethlehem Ephrathah, though you are small among the thousands of Judah, from you shall come forth for me the one who will rule in Israel, whose origins are from ancient times, from the days of eternity. Bethlehem, not Jerusalem, not Hebron, not Samaria, Bethlehem, the tiny village where David had been born 1,000 years earlier. From there the ruler will come. And look at the end of the verse. Whose origins are from ancient times, from the days of eternity. In Hebrew, Michmei Olam, from the days of endless time. Once again the strangeness appears, a ruler who is born on a specific date, in a specific place, but whose origins are eternal. The text does not try to resolve the paradox, it only announces it. When Herod, in Matthew 2, asks the priests where the Messiah was supposed to be born, they quote Micah without hesitation. Bethlehem. The scribes of the 1st century already read the verse the same way. It was not a Christian novelty, it was the common reading. 14, Jeremiah 23 and Jeremiah 31. The branch and the new covenant. Another century passes. Jerusalem is about to fall to Babylon. Jeremiah is preaching inside a condemned city, and in the middle of the announcement of disaster, he releases a promise. Behold, the days are coming when I will raise up for David a righteous branch, and he shall reign as king and act wisely. Branch, in Hebrew, tzemach, a sprout, a new shoot. The image is precise. The tree of David will be cut almost down to the ground. The kingdom will fall. The royal line will disappear from the scene. But from the stump, a branch will sprout. A descendant who appears when no one expected it anymore. And the name of this branch in the next verse is Yahweh our righteousness. Once again, a son of David who carries the divine name. Once again, the ancient text presses against the limits of what seemed possible. Jeremiah returns to the theme in chapter 31, and there he announces something even greater, a new covenant. Not like the covenant that I made with their fathers. It will be something else. It will be written not on tablets of stone, but on the heart. Who is the mediator? Jeremiah does not say. He only announces that it is coming. Jesus, on the night of the Last Supper, raises the cup and says, "This cup is the new covenant in my blood." Jeremiah's phrase finally receives its mediator. 15. Ezekiel 34. The one shepherd. Ezekiel is in exile in Babylon, together with the deported people. And he receives a prophecy against the corrupt shepherds of Israel, the leaders who abandoned the flock. At the end of the chapter, God promises to replace all of them. And I will set up over them one shepherd, and he shall feed them, my servant David. He shall feed them and be their shepherd. Look at what is being said. David, who died almost 500 years before Ezekiel, will shepherd the people. How? The Jews understood that Ezekiel was not promising the return of the historical David. He was promising a descendant of David who would carry the name and function of his ancestor, a son of David who would himself be called David. And when Jesus, in John 10, verse 11 says, I am the good shepherd lays down his life for the sheep. The listeners who knew Ezekiel heard the echo. The son of David promising to be the one shepherd. 16. Daniel 7, verses 13 and 14. The Son of Man. Daniel is also in exile. He receives a vision. He sees 4 beasts coming out of the sea, representing 4 empires. And at the climax of the vision, someone different appears. Behold, with the clouds of heaven came one like the Son of Man, and he came to the Ancient of Days, and to him was given dominion and glory and a kingdom that all peoples, nations, and languages should serve him. His dominion is an everlasting dominion which shall not pass away. The scene is one single scene. A man arrives at the heavenly throne coming with the clouds. He receives eternal worship from all nations. This is vocabulary reserved for God in the Hebrew Bible, and the strange thing is the title, Son of Man, a phrase that normally means human being. Why does a human being receive what only God receives? When Jesus is being judged by Caiaphas, in Mark 14, the high priest asks, Are you the Christ, the Son of the Blessed? Jesus answers, I am. And you will see the Son of Man seated at the right hand of power and coming with the clouds of heaven. Caiaphas tears his own robes. It was not the statement about being the Messiah that made the high priest tear his robes. It was the direct application of Daniel 7 to himself. 17, Daniel 9, the date, same prophet, 2 chapters later. And now comes perhaps the most mathematical prophecy in the Old Testament. Daniel is praying, confessing the sins of the people, asking for the end of the exile. The angel Gabriel appears and gives an enigmatic answer. 70 weeks are determined for the people and for the holy city. And those 70 weeks lead to a specific moment, from the going out of the command to restore and build Jerusalem until Messiah the Prince. There shall be 7 weeks and 62 weeks. 69 weeks in Hebrew are 69 sets of 7, 483 years. And after that, in verse 26, the Messiah shall be cut off, but not for himself. The command to rebuild Jerusalem comes from Artaxerxes in the 5th century before Christ. The early Christians calculated this count and arrived exactly at the time of Jesus' public ministry. 1st century Jews knew this window. Luke begins his gospel by speaking of people who were waiting for the consolation of Israel. They were waiting for a reason. Daniel's count had come due. 18. Zechariah 9, verse 9. The king on the donkey. Zechariah prophesies after the exile when the people are rebuilding Jerusalem, and he describes the king's entrance into the city. Rejoice greatly, O daughter of Zion. Behold, your king comes to you, righteous and having salvation, humble and mounted on a donkey, on a colt, the foal of a donkey. Look at that detail. Kings in the ancient Near East entered cities mounted on war horses. A horse is a symbol of army and conquest. A donkey is a symbol of peace, of humble arrival. Zechariah is describing a king who comes as a victor, but with the posture of one who comes to make peace. On Palm Sunday in Matthew 21, Jesus asks for a colt. He enters Jerusalem riding on it. The people shout, Hosanna! The evangelist quotes Zechariah 9 on purpose. It is not coincidence, it is deliberate fulfillment. 19, Zechariah 11 and 12, the 30 coins and the pierced one. Same prophet, 2 chapters later. Zechariah is performing a symbolic enactment. He represents a shepherd whom the people reject, and the wage they offer for his work is 30 pieces of silver. The prophet takes the money and throws it into the temple to the potter. As the text says, 30 pieces of silver was, in the law of Moses, the price of a slave killed by someone's ox. Exodus 21. It is the price of the life of a servant. Zechariah is describing the shepherd of Israel being valued at the price of a slave. Matthew in chapter 27 closes the cycle. Judas receives 30 pieces of silver to hand Jesus over. Then, filled with remorse, he throws the money into the temple. The priests take the money and buy the potter's field. Every detail of Zechariah's enactment fits the betrayal: the price, the place, the destination of the money. And in chapter 12, verse 10, God speaks in the first person. And they will look upon me, whom they have pierced. The grammatical detail is intense. The one speaking is God himself. And he says the people will look at him after he has been pierced. How is God himself pierced? John, in chapter 19 of his Gospel, after the crucifixion, writes, and another scripture says, they will look on him whom they have pierced. The passage is quoted on purpose. 20, Malachi 3, verse 1. The messenger, the last prophet of the Hebrew canon, 400 years before Christ. After him, prophetic silence until John the Baptist. And the last prophecy of the Hebrew scripture is precisely about the forerunner of the Messiah. Behold, I send my messenger, and he will prepare the way before me, and suddenly the Lord whom you seek will come to his temple. And in chapter 4, verse 5, Malachi adds a detail. Behold, I will send you Elijah the prophet before the great and terrible day of the Lord comes. An Elijah before the Messiah. First-century Jews expected Elijah to literally return. When John the Baptist begins preaching in the wilderness, dressed in skins and eating locusts, they ask if he is Elijah. Jesus himself, in Matthew 11, verse 14, says to the disciples, if you are willing to receive it, he is the Elijah who was to come. The last prophecy of the Old Testament and the first public figure of the New fit together exactly. And here the gallery ends. From the garden to Malachi. From Adam and Eve looking at the serpent to John the Baptist preaching in the Jordan. Almost 2,000 years of narrowing. Look at what happened. In the beginning, in Genesis 3, only a shadow, a seed, undefined, anonymous, distant, then a family, then a tribe, then a royal house, then a city, then a way of arriving, then a way of dying, then a calculable date, then the exact price of the betrayal, then the name of the forerunner. With every century, another layer. With every prophet, another detail that no one could invent later without being contradicted by older documents. And what no one could understand, reading these prophecies separately, was how they would fit into one single person. A Messiah descended from David, but who is also mighty God, who is born in a specific city but has eternal origins, who rules on a throne that lasts forever but is cut off before his time, who dies like a slave but is buried like a king, who is pierced by the people but is God himself looking back. How would these pieces fit into the same puzzle? David knew one thing, Isaiah knew another, Daniel knew another, Zechariah knew another. None of them saw the whole picture. They kept adding line by line without fully understanding what they were drawing together. And the picture only became visible after someone entered Jerusalem on a donkey, was sold for 30 coins, was pierced on a tree, was buried in the tomb of a rich man, and 3 days later rose again without his body seeing corruption, exactly as David had written in Psalm 16. The Old Testament does not announce an abstract idea, it announces a person. It does not announce a moral model. It announces a specific figure who would fulfill every detail the prophets scattered across the centuries. And when we read these texts in the order in which they were written, seeing how they tighten around one single person, it becomes difficult to believe that all of this is coincidence. There is too much pattern, too much precision, too much narrative stitching millennia together. If this video helped you see this thread running through the Old Testament, share it with someone who would enjoy seeing all of this connected. Leave a like down below and subscribe to the channel if you have not subscribed yet. I will see you in the next one.